Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for July 29th. July 29th is the 210th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, 211th in leap years, with 155 days remaining to the end of the year. It feels like we might have talked about Grok before, but I can't quite pin it down exactly when that was, so we're going to talk about it again today. Grok is a verb that means to understand, especially profoundly and intuitively. Establish deep, compassionate rapport with, as in, she grokked the features and abilities of her sewing machine and seemed to operate it as if they were one. Or, Paul Muad'Dib grokked the Fremen stillsuit and intuitively knew how to put it on and use it without instruction. The word grok comes to us by way of author Robert A. Heinlein in his science fiction novel, Stranger in a Strange Land. First known use of the word grok is in 1961. Grok. I thought to talk about the word grok today because it appears in the request for tomorrow's word by viewer at GingerRush7536. Thanks, Ginger. And if you have a word you'd like us to explore in this Word of the Day segment, drop it in the comments. We'll take a look at it. And with that, the year 238 started out on unsteady terms in the Roman Empire. In what some historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, the Romans had had about a hatful of their current emperor Maximinus Thrax. They revolted in the spring of that year, displacing him, and a Roman senator known as Gordian I was appointed Caesar, or emperor, and being a bit on the elderly side, he insisted that his son, Gordian II, come be co-emperor with him. Now, this was in March of the year 238, and the Gordians were actually across the Mediterranean in Carthage at the time. So they headed back to Rome, but before they could get to Rome to take over, an old supporter of Maximinus Thrax had them assassinated. Now the Senate was in a bit of a panic. Many of them had shown clear support for the Gordians, and Maximinus Thrax was still alive. They knew that Maximinus would be back and big mad. So they appointed 2 senators to be co-emperors. I would mention their names, but even though I completely mispronounced one of them the last time I read a report on them, the correct pronunciation of one of their names sounds like some other words now that I wouldn't be able to say without giggling like an adolescent. And the idea would most likely distract you, the viewer, from the story. So for right now, we'll just call them the 2 patrician senators. Unfortunately for them, many Romans despised these 2 because they were of the patrician class, which most ordinary citizens saw as snooty and out of touch. They didn't like these 2 at all, to the point that riots broke out. The only thing the Senate could think to do next was send for the grandson of the elder Gordian, 13-year-old Gordian III, and appoint him Caesar. As anticipated, Maximinus did return to Rome, big mad with the cherry on top. But before he could exact his revenge, he, his son, and his chief ministers were assassinated. The 2 patrician senators that I mentioned before were dragged through the streets of Rome and executed, and so it is that 13-year-old Gordian III was proclaimed emperor on July 29th in the year 238, the 6th emperor of the year. To his credit, he did rule until his death. Unfortunately, that was in the year 244 when he was 19. Rome had kind of a hard time keeping emperors along about this time in history. And apparently this is a day of very young people ascending to rulership because in the Mayan culture, a young fellow named Pakal ascended to the throne in the Mayan city-state of Palenque at the age of 12 on July 29th in the year 615. By the way, his name, Pakal, means shield in the classic Mayan language. Pakal lived a bit longer than Gordian III did. Where Gordian only lived to the age of 19, Pakal lived to the age of 80 and was responsible for the construction or extension of some of Palenque's most notable surviving inscriptions and monumental architecture. Somewhat significant to current events in 2024, as the Summer Olympics in Paris began within the last few days, was on July 29, 1836, that the Arc de Triomphe in Paris was inaugurated. On July 29, 1958, President Eisenhower signed into law the National Aeronautics and Space Act, creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, more commonly known as NASA. Now we have a playlist of episodes for this day in history, as well as a playlist of single subjects called How About That? And words of the day in a playlist called There's a Word for That. I'll leave links to those playlists for you. Today's song is Light My Fire by The Doors. Recorded in the summer of 1966, Light My Fire was released in January of 1967 on their first album, The Doors. It was then released as an edited single in April of 1967. It hit number 1 on July 29, 1967, and held that spot for 3 weeks. The song Light My Fire has been covered by other artists. Jose Feliciano released a version the following year in 1968, and that one also did well, landing within the top 10. Light My Fire was primarily written by Doors guitarist Robbie Krieger, and when he took it to the band, just about everyone had something to add to it, so authorship was credited to the entire band. In those days, there was some controversy over the phrase, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," and the band was asked to change that line when they were on The Ed Sullivan Show. They rehearsed it with the altered lyrics, where the word higher was replaced with better, but Jim Morrison, being Jim Morrison, when they went live, he sang it as it was originally written. Made Ed Sullivan real mad. Jim's defiance may have cost them some bookings, but they somehow managed to get along. In 1968, Buick wanted to use the song in an ad campaign. Come on, Buick, light my fire. And I think that would have been a cool campaign. Everyone in the group agreed to it except for Jim, who was in England, out of pocket, unavailable. When he heard about it, he pitched a fit and said if that commercial ran, he would personally smash a Buick with a sledgehammer. Buicks were noted for being pretty stout. Smashing one with a sledgehammer would have been quite the task. But Buick backed off. The ad never ran as far as I know. Light My Fire was number 1 on July 29, 1967. Link in the description. And I think that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share this video with the link in your email, messaging, or social media. If you enjoy this series, you can check out the playlist that contains these videos. I'll put a link to that in the description. That description lives on YouTube, so for other platforms, I'll include a link to my blog page called No Really. You can also find me on Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. All those links in that description. Alrighty, that's all I can think of right now. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Alrighty, back to work. I think we got it this time.